on childhood, charm, and the art of not trying. There's a country every one of us used to live in, and none of us can find the way back. We call it childhood. What we really mean is a time when nothing had to be earned, when looking confused worked better than looking competent, and when being helpless wasn't something to hide, but a kind of currency you could spend. Then, one birthday at a time, we were deported. Adulthood is the country they sent us to instead. And ever since, most of us have strange amount of energy trying to sneak back across that border, if only for an afternoon. This is why a certain kind of person unsettles us so pleasantly. They never got deported. Or if they did, some part of them stayed behind, and it shows in how easily they laugh, and how little they seem to be performing for anyone in the way trouble slides off them instead of sticking. We call this person the natural. And whether they know it or not, they are running one of the oldest smuggling operations in human history, bringing a little of that lost country back across the border, one unguarded moment at a time, and handing pieces of it to whoever happens to be standing close enough to catch them. Why we fall for it adulthood is mostly a long education in vigilance. We learn to watch what we say, to measure our reactions before we have them, to keep the softer parts of ourselves behind a door we control at all times. It's exhausting, and everyone is doing it to everyone else simultaneously, which is why a room full of adults so often feels like a room full of people quietly bracing for impact. Then someone walks in who isn't bracing. They say the wrong thing at the wrong volume and don't seem to notice. They laugh before checking whether laughing is appropriate. The effect is almost chemical. The tension drops not because anyone decided to relax, but because it's very hard to stay guarded next to someone who so plainly isn't. There's a second, quieter mechanism running underneath. Sympathy may be the fastest route into another person's guard ever discovered, and nothing produces sympathy faster than visible, unself-conscious weakness. Strength impresses people, but it rarely disarms them. If anything, strength makes onlookers straighten their own spine in response, a small competitive reflex. Weakness does the opposite. It asks for nothing directly and yet somehow gets everything because the instant we feel protective of someone, we've already stopped being wary of them. Every parent who has ever been talked out of a punishment by a 4-year-old's wobbling lip has already met this mechanism at full strength. The natural has simply never stopped using it. An old trick, none of this is new. One of the oldest surviving versions of the story isn't about a person at all. It's about a god who was only a few hours old. According to the old Greek telling, the infant Hermes was barely out of his wrappings before he slipped off from his mother Maia's cave and wandered toward Apollo's pastures, where he stole an entire herd of sacred cattle, cleverly enough that he tied bundles of bark to their hooves first, to throw off anyone tracking the footprints. By the time Apollo caught up with him, the baby had already invented a brand new instrument out of a tortoise shell and some cow gut, and when accused of the theft, he simply widened his eyes and denied the whole thing with such convincing, gurgling innocence that the assembled gods could barely keep from laughing. Cornered in the end, he didn't grovel. He picked up his new invention instead, played it, sang a little song praising Apollo's greatness, and was forgiven on the spot, cattle theft and all. Apollo didn't even get his full herd back. He walked away feeling like he'd gotten the better half of the bargain. That, in miniature, is the entire operating system of the natural. Commit the transgression, radiate absolutely no guilt about it, then offer something so charming in return that the injured party ends up feeling lucky to have been robbed. The four faces the natural is not one single character. Over the centuries, 4 main types have emerged, and the most powerful seducers often blend more than one. The innocent. The primary qualities here are weakness and a misunderstanding of the world. Innocence is weak because it is doomed to vanish in a harsh world. The child cannot protect it. The misunderstandings come from not knowing about good and evil and seeing everything through uncorrupted eyes. The weakness elicits sympathy. The misunderstandings make us laugh, and nothing is more seductive than a mixture of laughter and sympathy. The adult natural is not truly innocent. It is impossible to grow up and retain total innocence. But they preserve the illusion of it. They exaggerate their weakness to elicit the proper sympathy. They act like they still see the world through innocent eyes, which, in an adult, proves doubly humorous. Much of this is conscious, but to be effective, it must seem subtle and effortless. The impish children have a fearlessness that adults have lost. They do not see the possible consequences of their actions, how some people might be offended, how they might physically hurt themselves. Imps are brazen, blissfully uncaring. They infect you with their lighthearted spirit. Adult imps are seductive because of how different they are from the rest of us. Breaths of fresh air in a cautious world, they go full throttle, as if their impishness were uncontrollable and thus natural. If you play the part, do not worry about offending people now and then. You are too lovable, and inevitably they will forgive you. Just don't apologize or look contrite, for that would break the spell. Whatever you say or do, keep a glint in your eye to show that you do not take anything seriously. The wonder. A wonder child has a special, inexplicable talent, a gift for music, for mathematics, for sport. At work in their field, these children seem possessed and their actions effortless. Their work seems to spring from some inborn impulse, requiring remarkably little thought. Adult wonders are often former wonder children who have managed remarkably to retain their youthful impulsiveness and improvisational skills. True spontaneity is a delightful rarity, for everything in life conspires to rob us of it. To play the wonder, you need some skill that seems easy and natural, along with the ability to improvise. If in fact your skill takes practice, you must hide this and learn to make your work appear effortless. The more you hide the sweat behind what you do, the more natural and seductive it will appear. The undefensive lover. As people get older, they protect themselves against painful experiences by closing themselves off. The price is that they grow rigid physically and mentally. But children are by nature unprotected and open to experience, and this receptiveness is extremely attractive. In the presence of children, we become less rigid, infected with their openness. Undefensive lovers have somehow circumvented the self-protective process, retaining the playful, receptive spirit of the child. They often manifest this physically. They are graceful and seem to age less rapidly than others. Of all the natural's qualities, this one is the most useful. Defensiveness is deadly in seduction. Act defensive and you'll bring out defensiveness in others. The undefensive lover lowers the inhibitions of his or her target, a critical part of seduction. It is important to learn to not react defensively. Bend instead of resist. Be open to influence from others, and they will more easily fall under your spell. The type keeps resurfacing, in every medium available to it, and it never runs on quite the same fuel twice. Charlie Chaplin built an empire on the wide-eyed version. He arrived in Hollywood a fierce, ambitious young immigrant with a hard childhood behind him. And somewhere in his first year of films, he discovered that audiences didn't just laugh at his little tramp character. They ached for him. Baggy trousers, a cane he never quite seemed to know what to do with, a bowler hat that clearly belonged to a more dignified man than the one wearing it. The whole costume read as a child dressed in borrowed adult clothes, overmatched by a world built at the wrong scale. Crowds who had just lived through the mechanized horrors of World War I took one look at that lost, hopeful little figure and fell in love with the part of themselves he represented. He made sure to cast actors who were physically larger than he was, subliminally positioning them as adult bullies and himself as the helpless infant. He aroused a mix of laughter and sentiment. You both laughed and cried, and audiences sensed that the role came from somewhere deep inside, that he was sincere, that he was actually playing himself. Cora Pearl, born Emma Crouch in 1842, came from a respectable middle-class family in Plymouth, England. Her father doted on her, and when he abandoned the family, she was devastated. She emerged in Paris as a courtesan with a difference. She was not dramatically beautiful. Her body was boyish, her style garish. And yet the most dashing men of Europe vied for her favors, often ruining themselves in the process. It was her spirit and attitude that enthralled them. Spoiled by her father, she imagined that spoiling her was natural, that all men should do the same. The consequence was that, like a child, she never felt she had to try to please. She would leave a man on the slightest whim. She rode wildly through the Bois de Boulogne, cracking her whip. She appeared on stage practically naked, covered only in diamonds, and let them roll off into the footlights without stooping to pick them up. It was her powerful air of independence that made men want to possess her, tame her. Like a spoiled child, a man's relationship with her was on her terms. Josephine Baker grew up in one of America's worst slums, went to work at 8, and sometimes slept in a rat-infested basement. In 1925, she arrived in Paris with the Revue Neger. She came on stage bare-breasted, wearing a skirt of feathers, and performed a dance called Dangs Salvage. Her whole body seemed to come alive in a way the audience had never seen before, her rear end gyrating in patterns one critic likened to a hummingbird's. But what struck them most was the look on her face. She was having such fun. She radiated a joy that made her erotic dance oddly innocent, even slightly comic. She refused to be aligned with any club, developed a reputation for breaking contracts at will, making it clear she was ready to leave in an instant. Since childhood, she had been afraid of dependence on anyone. Now no one could take her for granted. Her refusal to compromise, or to be what she was expected to be, made everything she did seem authentic and natural. Genji, the hero of the 11th century novel The Tale of Genji, was the court's most incorrigible seducer. He was a natural, an undefensive lover, a man with a lifelong obsession with women, but whose appreciation of them made him irresistible. As he says to one princess, "I am always allowed my way." This self-belief is half of his charm. Resistance does not make him defensive. He retreats gracefully, reciting a little poetry, and as he leaves, the perfume of his robes trailing behind him, his victim wonders why she has been so afraid, and what she is missing by spurning him. Genji takes nothing seriously or personally, and even at 40, an age at which most men of his time were already looking old, he still seems like a boy. His seductive powers never leave him. Brigitte Bardot ran the reckless variant a few decades later, marketed almost from her first frame as a girl who genuinely didn't seem to register the effect she had on anyone. Tousled hair, bare feet, a pout that read less like a seduction technique than an actual sulk. Whether the naivety was real or an extremely well-maintained performance became, for her entire career, more or less beside the point. Audiences wanted the innocence to be real badly enough that they simply decided it was. Shirley Temple offers the purest possible example. Precisely because she wasn't performing an adult's idea of childhood, she was an actual child. Dimples and all, and Depression-era audiences queued around city blocks just to watch someone be delighted for 90 minutes straight. She is most useful here as a boundary marker. The real seductive art was never in a child being natural. It's in an adult managing the identical trick while paying rent. Lionel Messi has spent 2 decades running the gifted version on football pitches, playing with something that looks, even at the very highest level of professional sport, suspiciously like joy, a boy inside a grown man's contract, visibly delighted by his own feat in a sport that has otherwise been engineered within an inch of its life. Commentators regularly run out of technical vocabulary and fall back on the word magic, which is really just the Wonder Child effect wearing shin guards. Bill Clinton worked the unguarded version about as well as anyone in modern politics, repeatedly described by allies and opponents alike as possessing a natural warmth that felt disarmingly unrehearsed even when everyone in the room suspected it almost certainly wasn't. The trembling lip, the sense that he'd forgotten anyone else in the room existed and was speaking only to you. Whole crowds of skeptical people walked out of those encounters converted, and most of them couldn't quite explain how it had happened. Jennifer Lawrence, more recently, built early fame on a very specific, oddly calculated-looking casualness tripping on the way to collect an Oscar, talking about pizza in interviews, seeming faintly baffled by her own success in an industry built on appearing otherwise. An entire publicity apparatus discovered that unpretentious was itself an extremely marketable pose. The discipline of looking undisciplined here is the part that spoils the illusion slightly. Almost none of this is actually an accident. Real children are natural because they haven't yet learned to be anything else. Adults who manage the same effect are, with very few exceptions, running something closer to a magic trick. They noticed early on that a certain kind of spontaneity got them out of trouble or into someone's good graces, and they kept that particular muscle exercised long after everyone around them let theirs atrophy. This is not the same thing as simply staying an overgrown child. An adult who is genuinely just careless reads as immature, and immature is not seductive. It's mostly just tiring. The natural's version is subtler. The weakness has to look involuntary, even though underneath it's been rehearsed until it stopped feeling like a performance to the person doing it too. The hardest rule to follow is the one that sounds the easiest. Never let anyone catch you working at it. An innocent look that seems calculated stops being innocent on the spot. A prodigy who visibly strains stops looking like a wonder and starts looking like someone doing homework. The moment the effort shows, sympathy curdles into suspicion. And suspicion is the one reaction this entire archetype cannot survive. The sympathy trap, none of this is offered as pure innocence, and it's worth being honest about that, since the whole archetype depends on people not noticing it in the moment. Strength invites resistance. Vulnerability disarms it. And once you've felt genuinely protective of someone, you've already stopped auditing them. That's the entire mechanism, and it's exactly why the natural rarely has to ask for anything outright. Ask directly and you look needy, which kills the effect instantly. Simply appear to need help, appear delightfully out of your depth, appear touchingly unaware of rules everyone else is straining to follow, and people will supply the help unprompted. Feel faintly superior while doing it, and only rarely notice that their own superiority was the exact emotion required to stop them from paying attention to what was actually happening. The child who cries to avoid a punishment they clearly deserve usually isn't lying about being upset. They're simply deploying a real emotion with one eye on the effect it produces, and the two things aren't mutually exclusive, whatever we'd like to believe. Assuming otherwise is exactly how this particular trick keeps working on people who really ought to know better by now. Where it curdles, every version of this charm comes with an expiration mechanism built in. Push the innocence too hard and it stops reading as charm and starts reading as an act. A slightly insulting one at that, since nobody enjoys feeling visibly managed. A room can only absorb so much wide-eyed helplessness at once. The whole pose depends on scarcity. One natural in a room full of guarded adults is magnetic. A room that's entirely composed of naturals collapses into something closer to a kindergarten at pickup time, exhausting rather than enchanting, and nobody left to actually run the place. And the pose ages whether its owner agrees to age alongside it or not. Whatever reads as spontaneity at 25 can read as arrested development at 50 if the dosage never adjusts. Cora Pearl did not seem so charming when she was still wearing her pink flouncy dresses in her 50s. The trick was never to abandon the underlying quality. It's to let it mature the way its owner does. From boyish into merely youthful, from ingenue into simply warm, rather than freezing a 25-year-old's entire routine onto a face the calendar has clearly moved on without. As you age, your natural qualities should suggest more the child's open spirit, less an innocence that will no longer convince anyone. Practicing the unrehearsed, if you're wondering whether any of this can actually be learned, rather than simply inherited from a lucky childhood, the honest answer is, mostly, yes, though the learning curve punishes anyone looking for a shortcut. Start with the sequencing. Sympathy has to arrive before admiration, never after. Impress a room first, and try to seem vulnerable second, and the vulnerability reads as false modesty. Let uncertainty show up before competence does, and that same competence lands later as a pleasant surprise instead of a performance. Next, retire the reflexive apology or at least the over-eager version of it. Genuine naturals rarely over-apologize, because over-apologizing is itself a deeply adult, deeply self-conscious behavior. It's what people do when they're actively tracking how they're being perceived in real time. A 4-year-old who spills a drink doesn't deliver a paragraph of contrition. They look briefly stricken and move on, and somehow that lands as more disarming than any amount of groveling ever could. And then there's the part almost nobody wants to hear. You have to actually let something be at stake. A person performing openness while risking nothing real is easy to spot. And once spotted, the whole thing stops working instantly. The appeal depends entirely on the sense that you could. In fact, be hurt by this, that the unguarded door is a real door and not a painted one. That's the one ingredient that can't be faked convincingly for long, which might be the closest thing this whole subject has to a moral. The version of this that actually holds up over time isn't a trick layered on top of a real person. Eventually, it just has to become who you are, or it stops fooling anyone, including, sooner or later, yourself. Symbol: the lamb so soft and endearing. At 2 days old, the lamb can gambol gracefully. Within a week, it is playing follow the leader. Its weakness is part of its charm. The lamb is pure innocence, so innocent we want to possess it, even devour it. Why we keep falling for it? We live, by most measures, in the most surveilled, most self-conscious, most pre-rehearsed era human beings have ever built for themselves. Every gesture drafted for an audience before it's even made. Which is exactly why a person who still seems capable of an unrehearsed moment lands like contraband smuggled through a customs checkpoint nobody thought could still be beaten. The natural doesn't hand us back our actual youth. They hand us the sensation of it, borrowed for exactly as long as they're in the room, and quietly repossessed the moment they leave. We let them get away with an astonishing amount gladly, because for as long as the charm holds, some worn-down, overly vigilant part of us finally gets to stop guarding the door. In a strictly regulated society, where life follows strictly defined canons, the urge to escape from the chain of things established once and for all must be felt particularly strongly. And the most perfect of them does this with utmost perfection, for he serves this principle through the subtlety of his method which, offering the spectator an infantile pattern to be imitated, psychologically infects him with infantilism and draws him into the golden age of the infantile paradise of childhood. Sergei Eisenstein on Charlie Chaplin. A man may meet a woman and be shocked by her ugliness. Soon, if she is natural and unaffected, her expression makes him overlook the fault of her features. He begins to find her charming. It enters his head that she might be loved, and a week later he is living in hope. Stendhal, Love,